Welcome back to one of Nathan Bell's awesome commentary videos. Today, Nate wants to talk to you about the 90s movie, Sylvester Stallone's Demolition Man.
Yeah, well, I've really always enjoyed Sylvester Stallone's Demolition Man. It's a really interesting world portrayed in the movie. Some people might think it's just a senseless action movie, but it's actually a rather intelligent movie with a very distinct dystopian world which is displayed in the movie. And I've actually modelled aspects of my new book, 22nd Century Man, which will come out this year off the Demolition Man movie. So what's happening in Demolition Man is it's a totalitarian police state. There is no more crime because crime has been eradicated. And the ways they've achieved this status quo of no crime are quite interesting because people get fines for swearing. So you can't even swear. You're not even allowed to swear. That's how strict it is. You're not even allowed to say a swear word, not even with your friends. And this is like a statement on political correctness and speaking correctly, and the idea that if we control language, we can control people's thinking so that they're not negative and hateful. So the idea is if we eliminate swearing and hateful negative language, then people will be pleasant and kind all the time, and society will be friendly and loving. And if you look at the people in Demolition Man, they're all these absolute happy-go-lucky people. They never say anything negative. They never say anything hateful. They're always super positive. And all their language is super positive, and they're always super friendly, and it's like they've all been re-educated out of being negative and hateful like we can be in our society and demeaning, and re-educated into these lovely, over-the-top friendly people. So it's a really interesting take on re-education and language control. And you'll also note in Demolition Man that sex is outlawed and that they have they have sex through virtual reality. And I think also the idea in Demolition Man is that meat is outlawed, and they're a super healthy society where they don't eat any more meat or unhealthy foods. So it's this super regulated society where people don't even have sex anymore. Sex is banned. So you can assume from that they must have children through in vitro insemination or something, or through test tube babies. But it's interesting because in Demolition Man there's a group of people who live under the city in the sewers, and those people still eat hamburgers and chips, and they still eat junk food. And they live down in the sewers under the city because they call it freedom. They want to live unhealthy lives. They want to keep eating cheeseburgers and junk food. And they don't want to conform to this super strict health regime that is running the world, or this police state. And it is seen in the movie, Sylvester Stallone, who is a police officer, from the past, who has woken up in the future after being frozen, goes down to the underworld where the rebels live with one of the modern day police, and he gets offered a hamburger, and he eats the hamburger. He finds out it's a rat hamburger. So it's all about this regime, this society where everything is super regulated so that people will be super healthy all the time, so they won't eat any junk food, so they won't swear or say anything cruel or demeaning or negative. And it's just amazing the way the people are portrayed in the society. Because as I said, they're these super friendly, happy-go-lucky people. Nothing could ever be wrong. They're all super fit and healthy, and they're all super happy all the time, and they don't feel any anger. There's no more expressions of anger. So it's really interesting because you could gear the world that way if you had the right rules. And it's really interesting to think about people who want the world to be geared that way, or people who understand that the world could be geared that way with the right regulations. So whoever wrote Demolition Man really understood language control and really understood re-education. Very intelligent person wrote Demolition Man because they understood how these sorts of control states work. So, I find it a fascinating prospect because it's sort of similar to the way our society is becoming this super health society, which I agree with. You know, we're frowning upon smoking now, and we're frowning upon McDonald's, and we're frowning upon KFC, and people are moving away from unhealthy living towards healthy living, and there are now strict rules and regulations around how food producers like McDonald's and KFC label their food, and the government, the state, particularly in Australia, is heavily encouraging but not enforcing people to live healthy lives. But in Demolition Man, it's strictly enforced. It's illegal to be unhealthy. It's illegal to use unhealthy language. And that's the other thing that's coming in our society, which is similar to the status quo in Demolition Man, is we're now saying this language is unhealthy. And you know, you've heard about politicians who've been sent to have empathy classes. And I was talking about Kyle Sandilands in one of my videos, how his station had to send him to have sensitivity classes, because the view now is that this sort of conduct, this negative, hateful, angry and demeaning conduct is unhealthy, and now we send people, politicians and public figures, to have classes to learn to behave appropriately with appropriate conduct, and that is re-education, and that is very much what has happened in Demolition Man. The whole society is now held to this very high standard of what is, in this very narrow standard of what is acceptable behaviour, and in many ways that is the way our society is going, and personally I've thought about it a lot, and I think it's for the betterment of humanity. You know, I, to some extent, I think we should say that certain language is unhealthy. I don't think it's about swear words, though. In Demolition Man, the language control is about cursing and swearing. I think swearing's fine, you know. It's all a matter of context. You know, we can say fuck, we can say shit, we can say these words, but what I don't like is people who intentionally use language to harm others' psychology and to demean others and to lower their self-esteem. And we talk about toxic culture now in our society, and toxic language and toxic attitudes that harm others, and we're trying to minimise that. And our nation's politicians are now being sent to classes where they learn empathy, and our public figures in certain presenters and TV hosts are held to a very high standard of how they're expected to communicate, or they can actually be sent to classes, which is re-education, where they learn appropriate conduct. And in Demolition Man, every citizen is held to this very high standard of conduct. So it's all about conduct, and it's about what we deem acceptable in our society. So in Demolition Man, people aren't hateful and they aren't cruel anymore. And you could engineer a society that way if you had strict rules around language, and if you had strict rules around behaviour, and if you started re-educating people who were intentionally harmful to others. Because there are people who enjoy bringing others down, and there are people who are quite sinister, and they get a lot of joy and pleasure out of causing harm and suffering to others. So in a world like Demolition Man, a person who is identified as having that personality type, you might say a psychopath or a sociopath, a person who is identified as having that personality type would be sent to classes where they would be re-educated into having a healthy psychology. And this is what I've borrowed from Demolition Man in my new book, 22nd Century Man, because in 22nd Century Man, it's a bit more serious. You know, Demolition Man was a comical movie. My book's not comical. It's a bit more serious. But in my book, if you're deemed by a psychiatrist to have a psychopathic personality type, you'll be sent to a re-education centre where you'll be retrained out of that thinking and into a more positive, friendly thinking. And if you're not able to adopt a more positive, friendly thinking, you'll be left incarcerated indefinitely until you are reformed. And in some ways our society is moving towards this, and this push is coming from the left, and I think it's good, because I have mixed feelings about the whole thing, because I think there are appropriate occasions to insult and attack people, especially when you see someone who's just being blatantly irresponsible. But what I don't like is people who are just cruel because they're cruel people. And sometimes I think people who are just cruel people should be re-educated. You know, why do those of us who want to be polite and friendly and well-meaning to each other have to tolerate jerk-offs who want to abuse other people just because they find it entertaining. We don't have to tolerate it. We want to live in a civil society where people treat each other with respect. And it all comes down to communicating with respect and having good intentions. So that's a few things about the world in Demolition Man. Go and watch Demolition Man and dissect the world in Demolition Man and think about the rules, because the movie doesn't really specify what the laws are in the society, but if you think about it, you can speculate on how the laws have changed. So watch Demolition Man and then drop a comment in the comment section about your thoughts about that sort of police state.